if we have any face-to-face or any person-to-person discussion. I want to talk about tree boards, and I want to first say that by all means, this isn't everything that there is to know about tree boards. It's kind of my thoughts on it, and I'm sure some of you have other ideas and other thoughts, and those are just fine. So what I'm going to go through today is primarily my thinking on how to make tree boards work effectively. And the nice thing about today is at 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, we had our tree board meeting, and because of this webinar season program, I got to leave and let them plant trees for a change without me having to plant trees. So they're digging holes and putting in some trees here in town as we speak. What we want to do is look into what groups such as yourselves can do. One of the things I like to do is ask all of you who are involved in this 2 questions. Fill those out. Just take a second. The first one is, right now we have 31 attendees, and I put up a question for you, and let me know how many of you are either members of tree boards or used to be on a tree board or not on a tree board. Where we are now, 57, 60, or not.
Bob, while they're filling out the poll, I've got one of our attendees has said that she can't hear you very well through her phone line, so you just raise your voice a little bit.
Is that better? I'll pretend I'm in a big lecture hall shouting at students. So, okay, is that better, Leslie?
So far, so good. I haven't gotten any negative response.
Okay. So anyhow, it looks like probably the majority of you are currently serving on tree boards. None of you have said you were previously not on tree boards. I'd like to go to the second question. This is particularly for those of you who are not on a tree board. Are any of you municipal employees? City foresters or city arborists or public works people? If you could go ahead and just one. Okay. Well, why don't I get back to the slide?
Bob, let me open up that poll. For some reason, it didn't open.
Oh, okay.
So now you can vote. Everybody should be able to vote now. Sorry about that.
Okay, so good. So most of you, let's see. Those of you who are not on tree boards, it looks like about 70% are municipal employees. So good. This will be some of the content. Hopefully, we'll be able to address all of your issues. Let's move along and go to the next one. Okay. So what's a tree board? And it's a simple question. The answer isn't necessarily all that simple. Most of them are advisory. They're citizens that are appointed by a community to advise the forestry program, if you have one in the community, on what policies to set, what they can do, and so on, and to assist them. Some boards are policy setting, or they're a commission, and I'll get to what those kind of boards are in just a minute. The third is a working board, and that's often an advisory board. And working boards tend to be in smaller communities where there are not any municipal employees that are involved in tree care, tree management for the community. So,
Bob, they're still having problems hearing you, so I'm not sure if your speakerphone might not be picking up your voice entirely.
Okay. Let me try this. Is this better? Can people hear me better? I'm just talking into the regular phone now. Let me know, Leslie, if it's okay.
Okay, I'll keep you posted.
Okay. A tree advisory board, then, often, and I have it shown here with a dashed line, and again, it's to advise the city forester, to help write and set policy for the community, and so on. And, of course, in many communities, the city forester works for the public works director. In some cases, they work for a park and recreation director, and that varies from community to community. Tree commissions, they're not real common, but they tend to be an elected board, or there is a park and tree commission, and usually it's part of a park and tree commission. Some larger cities have these. They have taxing power to support themselves. In that case, there's a direct line responsibility either to the Parks Director and through the Parks Director to the City Forester or directly to the City Forester. So in that case, the forestry personnel work directly for the commission. And again, they are elected, which, with which they would have to be to give them taxing authority. Working Tree Board, that's what we have in our town of Oriental. And that can be, we have no city forester. I chair the tree board, and we report directly to the commissioners. And we're volunteers, but we do have authority with a tree ordinance to do things in the community. Because Oriental is a town with a lot of retirees in it, we have time to actually work on the urban forestry plan. So we get our hands dirty. People see us out on the street planting trees and pruning trees, and that really garners a lot of community support. So if you have a tree board and a city forester, certainly you can have a tree board that works and actually does things. And my experience here has been that people are very happy to see one of the town commissions actually going out and working. I often get it saying, gee, it's nice to see somebody doing more than just talking. So we're very popular here in the town. Now, in recent years, especially, with budget problems that communities have had, they really play an increasing role in community forestry programs. The tree board can increase the support for community forestry by being visible, by making suggestions, by attending town board meetings. Tree boards can work with neighborhood organizations. Certainly, larger communities, larger than the one I live in, because we only have 860 people in town. They can work with neighborhood organizations to meet the needs of neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods have different needs in terms of what forestry can do. And they can increase the level community-wide of urban forestry, and they do this by certainly getting publicity for the things that they're involved in, things they would like to do. So responsibilities of tree boards, and this is not a list to end all lists. These are just some of my thoughts. But your first thing, I think, you want to be our tree advocates. I'll address each one of these thoughts in more detail. But you want to be the people out in the community speaking for the trees, for the need of the trees. You need to make elected officials aware that urban forestry is more than planting trees. And they often think, it's very easy to have a tree planting ceremony and get elected officials out because it's a nice photo op where they can be there watching the tree planting and, of course, get on television or in the newspaper, what have you. But when was the last time any elected officials came out when you were pruning or removing trees? So they need to know that, yeah, it's great to plant trees, but there's a whole lot more going on than just planting trees. I think an overriding responsibility for a community is increasing canopy cover. To me, that's one of the best measurements of the success of a program, is how much shade that you can cast in a community. Responsibility is to educate the community in terms of what trees and tree canopy will do for the community. Tree care, you certainly need to advocate for tree care. You need, and I think this next one is becoming really important, we need to anticipate future stresses, and I'll get into what those are in just a little bit. You need to protect existing trees, and you need to be involved community-wide in efforts at land use planning and the inclusion of green space. So all of those are important attributes. And as we go along, too, towards the end, I'll have time to answer questions. If any of you have questions, be sure to let Leslie know. Okay, tree advocates. So speak out on every appropriate and even inappropriate occasion for the trees. Sometimes people don't want to hear what we're saying about trees, but when the opportunity is there, that's your opportunity to say something favorable about what's going on in your community. You really need to support elected officials and educate them. And in our community, we have elections every 2 years, and all 5 commissioners come up for election at one time. So in any 1 year, election year, we can have a whole new commission to deal with. So it's not a question of just assuming that they know what's going on. You need to educate new members and long-term members. You need to continuously keep them informed. And you really, particularly the ones that favor your program, you want to work with them. You want to accept speaking engagements that deal with urban forestry. Service clubs, schools are often desperate for speakers. I've been in service clubs, and I know the people that have tried to run programs, say, for weekly or monthly meetings, and they're always looking for something. So don't be afraid to get up and again, be a tree advocate. And service clubs like projects as well. So if you give them an opportunity to go out and help you plant trees or repair a planting site, often you're very successful at being able to do that. Elected officials, they control the budget. And if they're happy with what you're doing, you're going to do better in terms of your budget. But again, as I said before, you need to educate them. You need to give them opportunities to speak out in favor of trees. And I know here in our town, our local elected officials, they do that for us, and we're very happy with it. Offer to write Arbor Day speeches for them. Nobody likes to write a speech, but people like to give speeches. A friend of mine who was the city forester for a large city in the Midwest every year would put on a huge Arbor Day program, and they have at a school, and they would have bands and the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts and flags waving, and he'd invite the mayor to speak, and the mayor would always go speak because the TV cameras were there. Then he would write the speech for the mayor, and the mayor would go on eloquently about how wonderful trees are and how much he loved trees in the community. And then 2 weeks later, budget hearings started, so they already had the mayor on record as being pretty much in favor of trees, which helped them. And remember, nobody will admit they don't like trees, so you can always make good points with people about trees. Also know who the people are who don't think much of an urban forestry program, and while they may be enemies of your program, they're not your enemy, and you want to befriend them, and if possible, educate them. In some communities, I've seen people who are adamantly opposed to the tree program be appointed to a tree board and become very strong advocates. You also want to be creative with the elected officials. And again, this friend of mine used to use this every year at budget time because cities periodically have to rebuild streets. And for every dollar spent, you can include trees in the rebuilding of a street for only 2 cents out of the dollar. And it's not much, and it's a good way of getting trees planted. And the other good thing is that the cost of planting the trees goes into the Public Works Street Department budget and not out of the forestry budget. So be creative with elected officials. Canopy cover, as I said before, is really one of the, in my mind, one of the easiest to measure, I guess, descriptors of how good your program is working. It's a good way to see how successful you are. And a couple of things. One, it's important to plant trees, but it's other to see if you can protect and keep the big trees, because a big tree does a whole lot more than a bunch of little trees for a community in terms of all the good things that we see trees doing, such as, shade, cooling the city, reducing energy costs, increasing property values. There's a whole host of things that big trees are good at doing. Educate the public on the benefits of increasing canopy cover. Again, this is where you need to point out not just, we're planting trees because they look nice, but we're putting a canopy over the community to make it a more livable community. And canopy is really more than public trees. There's far more private trees than public trees. But people, when they see public trees taken care of by competent people, then they tend to want to do that with their trees. And when they understand that their property values are higher when they when they have a good tree stand in their yard, they tend to favor that. So to me, that is really a nice measure. And with things like Google Earth and other systems like that, it's not hard to estimate where the trees are in terms of canopy cover in your community and where you need to do more with it. Education, that's never ending, as I mentioned before, not just for elected officials but for the community. So youth service clubs, as I mentioned before, adults need to be reminded of how important trees are. Work with kids. They're some of your best advocates. You know, kids are born loving nature. Unfortunately, we often sever the bond by overly urbanizing their lives. You know, when you see people on television whose greatest accomplishment of the year was to get the first new Xbox after Thanksgiving, you know, there's more to life than Xboxes. So kids like that. You need to keep them reminded of it. Teachers are looking for programs from outside the school, and kids love to have somebody different in rather than their teachers every day. Tree City USA, that's a very important educational tool, as is Arbor Day, and both of them are really quite related. You can educate yourself. We have an urban forestry council here in North Carolina. Most states do. Become familiar with them and work with them. State Forest Services and the U.S. Forest Service, they have lots of good information out there you can find online or other ways about trees. You know, the Tree Owner's Manual from the federal government. Lots and lots of things are available for you to continuously educate yourself. And really today, with computers, with being able to go online, it's so easy to find good information that will help you with the tree program. The National Arbor Day Foundation publishes the Tree City Bulletins. They're very useful. They're typically 4 to maybe 6 pages long and cover a whole host of issues on tree care and community forestry. Attend seminars. 2 weeks ago, 5 members of our tree board here in our town went to a seminar in a city about an hour and a half away, and they all thoroughly enjoyed it. So certainly states put on seminars. The International Society of Arboriculture, if any of you are members of that organization, and anyone can join, it's not limited to professionals, they put on seminars and programs. So keep your eye open for those. Go to, I know here in North Carolina we have a big green and growing program that we're a part of with the state every year that many, many people attend. State Extension Services certainly are a host of information for you, a wealth of information. You can become master gardeners, and trees are certainly a component of that. As I mentioned, lots of information on the web, lots of things out there in printed form for you to use and refer to. So keep your own education going. Tree City USA, why do we need it? I think that's really a great opportunity for communities. Again, that's put on by the National Arbor Day Foundation and in working with states to recognize cities. Requirements are pretty minimal. Being a Tree City USA means that, excuse me just a second, it means that you do certain things, and the requirements aren't stiff. And the point of Tree City USA isn't to say, you know, you have the best community forestry program in the state. The primary function is to draw attention to your program. So it's really a tremendously useful public relations program. The impact is large because it makes the city budget for trees. Not much, $2 per capita, but it becomes a line in the city's budget that they're spending money on trees, and people see that year after year after year. The mayor and the city council have to proclaim Arbor Day for you, and that usually is something that is worth at least some recognition in the local media. And so that also means that they have to do it themselves. They have to see what you're doing. Arbor Day, again, it's great to invite people to that, have an Arbor Day program.
And really, what you're doing is making the public aware of your community forestry, of urban forestry. So that's really the big function of it, and it's a very, very, very useful tool. Celebrate Arbor Day. Probably many of you do that. It's better than Halloween and a whole lot of other holidays. Of course, that's my personal bias. But it goes back to, if you look at the stamp on the right, the 2-cent stamp from 1932, and it celebrates going back to 1872. And that was when J. Sterling Morton, who was Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Nebraska, thought that Nebraska needed more trees. And I've been to Nebraska, and there's a lot of Nebraska that doesn't have a lot of trees because it was originally one of the prairie states. So he started it, and it has spread nationally. And there's lots of opportunities for it. It's been going on for a long time. It's an opportunity you never really want to pass up. Some things that you can do for Arbor Day: plant a tree at a school, or plant some trees at a school. Get the kids out there. Give away free seedlings and have them take them home. Now, probably most of the seedlings you give away won't make it to a mature tree size. Some of them won't even make it into the ground. But if some are put out there, just by the idea of planting a tree, people have learned something. Have tree planting ceremonies in parks or other public places. We do that every year here in town. We have a tree planting on Arbor Day. Public seminars and workshops. We have one that goes along with our Arbor Day program every year. Typically, we cover how to prune a young tree and train it, and we do a little pruning on site for them to see what to do. And, of course, you know, how to properly plant a tree. So it's a good chance to teach people in the community. You can have a big Arbor Day program if you're going to replant a park or you know, plant a whole street full of trees. You can plant memorial trees. Some communities, for a contribution, they'll plant a tree in somebody's name for you on the street. We used to have, in a little town I lived in Wisconsin, we used to have an Arbor Day race. And we would start at one part of town, everybody would run to the tree planting site, and we'd plant a tree. So that was very popular. As far as tree care goes, tree boards can get involved in it as much as they want. Again, our tree board here in our town, most of us are retired, so we have time to do it. So we plant trees. We water them the first year, particularly when we get dry spells, which coastal Carolina gets very hot in the summer, and we can go a couple of weeks sometimes with no rain. We can prune and train small trees. It's not hard to learn how to train a young tree to become a good tree as a mature tree. And tree boards can conduct inventory. That's commonly done. So there's a lot of activities that you can really participate in on a tree board. Future stresses, and this is something that's given me, and I've mentioned this in other meetings, globalization. While everybody's happy with the economic cooperation that's going on, it's also bringing us lots and lots of problems. You know, chestnut blight, Dutch elm disease, gypsy moth, emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly adelgid, Asian longhorn beetle, 1,000 cankers on walnut, laurel wilt, sudden oak death. And every time a container is open in a port, and any time a plane lands, you really don't know what's going to crawl out of those containers or jump off the plane and cause problems for you. And if you look at that, you know, the first half of the 20th century, the big problem was chestnut blight and gypsy moth. That was over a long period of time. But look at how many of these problems have entered into the urban forest just in the last couple of decades. So the problem is accelerating as the global economy becomes more complex. Climate change, that's going to cause more stresses on cities. It's going to get hotter. It is getting hotter. And although we think climate change can mean different things in different parts, it's frequently drier. You might have the same amount of rainfall, but when the temperature's higher, you evaporate water faster out of your systems. So understand that the trees are going to be stressed by higher temperatures and reduced availability of moisture. Here in North Carolina, I've lived here now for 11 years. And in every one of those years, or practically every one of them, some part of the state was in drought. And so, drought is how we compare what's going on right now with a historic record. And what that means is that we're deviating from the historic record in terms of drought more frequently than we have in the past. And so really, drought's becoming the new normal in many parts of the country. Urban heat islands, of course, are hot simply because of what they are. Lower vegetation and lots of surfaces to absorb solar energy. But the urban heat islands are getting hotter, and we need more canopy to keep them more livable. More pest damage on hotter streets. This is interesting, and this was some work done by Dr. Stephen Frank at NC State, where he found that in several cities, two scale problems, gloomy scale on red maple and an oak licanium scale on willow oak. And what he found was that if you looked at satellite information on temperatures in cities, the hotter the street was, the more prevalent these problems were. And these are native pests, and you don't find them in the forest, or very rarely do you. But they're opportunistic, and they take advantage of trees that are under more stress. And so we're going to have to deal with more difficult problems in growing trees in the future. We need to protect the ones we have. Does a tree really have to be removed? And often you can keep a tree from being removed by the kind of engineering you do with a project to protect a tree. You have to ask yourselves, when we rebuild streets, why are we making them wider when people were driving smaller cars? Because of fuel economies of smaller cars. So, when a street rebuilding project is being discussed, I think a question we need to ask is, are we going to leave room on that street for street trees? And I think you can argue that you really do, and in the long run, they're going to be more important than a wider street. You need a tree protection ordinance. Now, tree protection ordinances can take two forms. One is to protect community trees that the community owns by having certain requirements of construction around them. And the other is that some communities that have a lot of large trees on private land have tree protection ordinances requiring a permit to remove even private trees that are large trees. You may or may not want to do that in your community, but there's certainly a lot of these kinds of ordinances around the country. For the engineers, the sidewalk's been cracked and buckled by the roots. Well, what can you do? Well, you can certainly replace the sidewalk, but what's wrong with bringing in some fill and raising the grade a little bit under the sidewalk so you don't have to cut roots? So you can bridge over troublesome roots. And sidewalks really don't have to be straight. I know engineers looking through a transit see straight lines, but you can certainly move sidewalks one way or the other to protect trees. And finally, in terms of tree protection, not all trees can nor should they be saved. And brings me to one of the other, I think, important issues, and that is risk assessment. Trees are sometimes more of a liability than an asset to the community. And any urban forestry program really needs to consider this question of risk management. And the idea being that we need to look at our trees critically and be pretty hard-nosed about it and decide, this tree is becoming a liability and it needs to go. And I know when trees fail and cause injuries, communities wind up in court, trying to establish just simply who was at fault for that happening. So I'm not, I don't anticipate tree board members who are volunteers will be instantly good risk assessors, but certainly you can have commercial arborists come in and look at your trees to let you know, whoops, that's the wrong way here, know what needs to be done. Land use planning and green space. Trees are really part of the whole community, so you don't want to look at them in a vacuum. They're not the only green infrastructure in a community. There's lots of things that, the turf, the shrubs, the woodland, the abandoned lots, they're all part of the green space of a community. And public trees are wonderful, and that's what tree boards primarily deal with. But 9 out of 10 trees in cities, particularly larger cities, are on private property, on the average. There's great variability in this, but on the average, a study found that really only about 10% of the trees in a community are publicly owned. And so you need to concern yourself with private trees and what can be done to preserve them during land development and what can be done to protect them and encourage them. And most people want nice trees in their yard, so you can help them find out how to keep them there and keep them healthy. When we're building new roads, new developments, interestingly, I remember several years ago, a study found that over a 30, 40-year period, the tree lawn, the planting strips, have gotten narrower and narrower. And yet we want to plant big trees. And you can't grow a big tree in a 3 or 4 foot wide tree lawn. And if canopy is something that's important for you, then you need to work with the community in terms of how they do land development, how they build streets, and get them to put wide lawns in so you can grow a decent tree in them. Parks, certainly parks are important, greenways are important. All of these need to be integrated into the community under sort of the overall heading of community forestry. We can certainly connect corridors by connecting parks to greenways and parks to other parks. It allows people to move from park to park through a greenway and a corridor, and it allows wildlife to move from park to park, which is good for wildlife habitat. And we need to promote planned development in the community. If the developer's going to come in, there are lots of different alternatives to building a new subdivision or building a new commercial district. And when the planning process early on is when you really want to get involved in shaping how it comes out. So you need some partners. Engineers, often city foresters and arborists consider engineers the enemy, and they're not. They have a job to do. They have to build things. They have to take care of things they build. Our job in forestry is to plant things and take care of things we plant, and we need to work with engineers to make sure there's a place to put them. In western North Carolina, the state urban forester, Eric Mucke, gave a very good seminar a couple of years ago, and he talked about tree survival and neckties. And he said that the number of trees that survive a given planting for a public works project is inversely proportional to the number of people wearing neckties at the dedication. And the idea being that the bigger and more expensive project there was, the less space they have for growing healthy trees. So the more people that show up for a big project, it means they've less space for trees to grow and develop and mature, so they're more likely to die. So, again, you need to work with engineers early on in the process. Don't let trees go in as an afterthought. They design the project, and then they come to you and say, well, okay, we want you to landscape it. You need to be there on day one when they start designing the project so they know what the tree needs are. Utility foresters. People like to fuss at utilities for what they do to trees, but the other side of that is that people fuss even more when the electricity goes off. So work with your utility foresters. They don't want bad PR for their trees, their tree pruning activities, and they're always eager to come up with alternatives to planting a big tree under low-hanging wires. So be sure to work with them. Partners that you need. There are other organizations in your community beyond the tree board. I just listed a couple, and they have websites you can go visit and see what they have. And these are all listed on the handout if you choose to print one out. But, Friends of Trees in Portland, Oregon, Park People in Denver, our city forest, I'm not sure where they are, New York Trees, Greening of Detroit, Friends of the Urban Forest, Cross Timbers Urban Forest Council in Fort works. Don't limit your activities to just your group on the tree board. You want to go out and find neighborhood groups. You want to go out and find community groups. Certainly you could work with your local Audubon society. They're always happy to have trees to help the bird population. You can work with a whole host of groups that have an interest in improving community life. So reach out and get partners. If you're going to have a tree planting, get another group that's interested in community green space to help you do the tree planting. Keep your tree ordinance current. Do you need tree protection? Our ordinance here in Oriental protects public trees. It doesn't deal with privately owned trees, but it establishes ownership of the trees by the community and protects them. We had an issue a letter to a community resident for pruning a street tree and doing a terrible job of it. But he didn't know. We didn't bring the force of law upon him. We didn't fine him, but we told him not to do it again. Do you have a permitting system? Does the city approve what's planted on the street right away? And they should. Do you have landscape requirements? We put one of those in our ordinance about 5 years ago that requires any parking lot reconstruction over a certain size, or any new parking lots over a certain size, be landscape, and that we improve the landscape plan, and that the landscape plan has enough soil available to grow a decent tree in. Here in coastal North Carolina, we worry a lot about runoff into our streams and rivers and sounds, and so we have pervious surface requirements, which means when it rains, we want the water to soak into the soil rather than run off. If the water soaks into the soil, oxygen goes in there too, so you can grow more trees and healthier trees if you have pervious surface available for roots to form. And finally, we do focus on canopy cover in the community. So we have to amend our ordinance every few years to put new information to keep it current. So what can tree boards bring to a community? They can bring new ideas. They can bring skills not available in an organization. If you're going to do a inventory in your community, you can use a computer system. Find somebody who likes computers and get them on your tree board. If you have somebody that's a good speaker, you can increase the public support. You can do more work. Again, all of the tree work really on planting and establishing young trees and training young trees in our small town, because we are so small, is done by volunteers. So they're very useful. And I kind of want to wrap this up and save a few minutes for questions here at the end. But I want to talk about our town and the things that we've been able to accomplish in a very small community. Again, population of 860 people. Oriental is two things. It's a fishing town, and because we're on the mouth of the Neuse River where it enters Pamlico Sound, and it's also called the sailing capital of North Carolina. A lot of people like me retire here for the sailing, or people keep boats here who live on the inland cities to sail. So let me just go over a report we gave last year. And again, this is all in the handout if you download it. But we gave this to the town board at their annual retreat last year. And what we did in 2012. Okay, we continue to follow the 1996 long-range tree planting master plan. Now, that was done with a grant from the State Urban Council. And so the State Urban Forest Council supported us having this. And we use it. We don't use it we even use it, every month. But it's there, and when people say, well, what are you doing? What are you following? We say, this is what we're doing. And it's not overly ambitious, but the plan was to reestablish the tree canopy over the town. And again, all the reasons why we want to do that. Our management program, these are the things that we do. We have 905 street trees, 308 park trees, and other public trees. We do an annual risk assessment, and we've removed some trees we deem to be too risky. We have a 3-year pruning cycle for young trees. We've gone through our first 3 years of that. We're going into year 4 now on it, and we're training all the young trees. bigger trees, we contract local tree services, and we've been able to convince one of our local arborists that he should become a certified arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture, and he's doing it. We're very happy with that because many times rural communities and rural counties really don't have certified arborists. They just have somebody with a chainsaw and a pickup truck. Again, we require landscaping of parking lots. We put a provision in our ordinance a few years back to protect trees from utility trenching public trees. And again, the things that we do are kind of listed there: planting, pruning, watering, and so on. And we do news releases, and we give seminars in the community. We're at about 55% stocking of available street tree planting sites, and our goal was 80. This way we're letting the town board know, look, we have a long-range goal. It's part of our master street tree plan. So we need to keep planting and need to keep the efforts available, and of course they need to keep funding our buying of trees and taking care of trees. Tree board facts, we give this to the town board every year. It was established in 1992. Again, I've only been on it for about 10 years, so it's been around before I moved here. We have an ordinance established the tree board, Tree City USA, for 18 years. We manage all the park, street trees, and other public trees. And in 2012, we planted and watered 71 trees. We pruned 401. We removed 15 trees. The value when we applied for Tree City USA recognition last year, the effort on part of the tree board working on these trees was valued at $1,200 or $12,500 by the National Arbor Day Foundation. We had Arbor Day, and we had a planting and pruning seminar. And again, we point out to the town that we're going to continue to meet the goals of the long-range plan and in the Oriental Tree Ordinance. And so once a year, they get this. We hope they read it, but even if they don't read it, we go to their retreat and we talk about it. And with that, it looks like we've got about 10 minutes left, and so I told Leslie I would reserve the last 10 minutes or so to answer any questions any of you might have. So, Leslie, you want to coordinate that for me?
Sure. Yes. We've got a couple different ways you can ask some questions of Dr. Miller. You can either raise your hand using the feedback button and select you've got a question, and I'll call you out, and we can unmute your phone and start dialogue there. Or you could post your question and answers or your questions in the Q&A box, and I will bring attention to those. We have about 30 people on the call itself, so hopefully we get some good questions going. We've got a question from Jane on the Q&A box. She asks, she says that her tree board was recently approached about using the town's GIS. How are other tree boards using this technology?
Okay, we have a GIS here in Oriental, but we don't have the trees on it yet. We did an inventory about 5 years ago, and we're planning on doing one again this year. And I believe we're going to be able to tie it in. It's handy to know where they are, and so I do know that a number of communities now do link their tree inventory to a GIS, and then if you click on the map, you'll get a box that will tell you what that tree is and its size. And in some cases, they actually record each time the tree is pruned and develop a kind of a maintenance history for it.
Okay, and if others have comment to that, you can always post it in the reply all of the question and answer box. We have another question from Sandra. She said, is the tree board and or volunteers covered under the town's liability insurance? I'm assuming you're talking about when they're doing volunteer work out in the field, either inventories or pruning jobs.
We are, and what we are careful is not to do things that could get somebody hurt. In other words, we prune young trees with hand tools. Anything that requires going up into a tree on a ladder or climbing or anything like that, we don't do. and the town tells us specifically not to do that. We also, when we do hire arborists to do work on larger trees, we require them to follow the ANSI safety standards in terms of protective gear and in terms of having their own insurance. So, but yeah, we are covered but we're cautious not to do anything that's going to get somebody hurt.
And I have, just to kind of add a little bit to that, working with the city of Raleigh, which is where I reside, I've gone on a couple of the volunteer days where they've planted trees and done cleanups in parks and stuff and done some minor pruning. Again, using volunteers. They keep the volunteers on the ground. They don't do anything above ground. But the city actually has all the volunteers sign a waiver beforehand indicating, safe work practices, and then they sign off on it, so it kind of reduces the town's liabilities to that site at that time. So that's also an option for if you're using volunteers to do tree work within your city. We've got another question on here from David Cleveland. He asks, does a municipality have the authority to prune or remove trees along streets on private property?
Oh, some communities do. Our community does not. If we have a private tree that's obstructing a sign or a sidewalk, then we prune it or have them prune it. So we can do that. If we see a tree that is dead or it appears to be a high-risk tree, we have our town manager write a letter to the property owner and advise them of the problem and recommend they remove that tree. But we don't have condemnation. Some communities do, and a lot of times condemnation of private trees is tied in with diseases of trees as a sanitation approach, or trees that are deemed to be too dangerous to leave up, too risky to leave up. But our community does not have that authority. It could be put in the ordinance, but nobody has wanted to do that, at least up to this point.
All right, and I've got a question that maybe if you, Bob, or maybe one of the other attendees might be able to ask or answer. I've had a couple of municipalities here in North Carolina inquire about bringing a consulting arborist on board to act as the town city forester for some of the smaller communities or medium-sized communities that don't have that position on staff. They've contracted out, or they're interested in contracting out to a consulting arborist that kind of work. Do you have any experience with that, or anybody on the call might be able to speak to how that kind of arrangement might be initiated?
Yeah, I haven't. I know that, this is Bob, I know that does happen in some communities, and they'll contract them to work, maybe 10 hours a month or whatever, and they do have a contract with it, and they help them direct the program. I've not had any experience with it personally. Okay.
I just thought I'd inquire because I think that might be something that happens a little bit more often these days.
It does. I know when I lived in Wisconsin, I know some communities were doing that, and some commercial arborists were offering that as a service. I know that too. We had a consultant write our management plan for Oriental back, in 1996, I think, is when they did it. And I know some tree companies that also will come in and do inventories for you, and they will write management plans for you.
Okay. We've got another question from Marian Al. It says, our state requires a public tree ordinance passed before obtaining Tree City USA, even if we meet all other requirements. Is this common practice, and is it coming from State Forest Service of Texas?
I think I understand your question. To qualify, you have to have a tree ordinance for Tree City USA. Is that your question? If that's your question, yes, you do have. One of the requirements is you have an ordinance.
I think she might be inquiring about the public tree ordinance specifically. And just from my experience of working with Arbor Day Foundation and the Tree City USA program, they don't specify specifically what type of ordinance is required. They just do require a tree ordinance to be in place for a municipality. And I know with the Texas Forest Service there, they've gone above and beyond what the National Arbor Day Association requires and actually specified that a public tree ordinance. So that public tree ordinance is addressing how the city maintains or manages its trees, just to kind of clarify and put a little bit more direction behind their Arbor Day program.
Ah, okay, I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
We've got another question from Michelle Brown in the city of Wilson. Says that we are in the midst of revising our recommended landscaping list of species and are leaning heavily towards native species. What is your experience and or suggestions with implementing native species and working with local nurseries?
Well, we just went through this morning at our tree board meeting. In rural areas, it's hard to find a good variety of trees in nurseries. You tend to find, now we plant a lot of oaks. We live oaks and Shumard and southern reds and willow oaks. But predominantly we like to plant the live oaks because we're in hurricane country and we get flooded with salt water from time to time, and they can handle it. And those are natives. We also plant a lot of crepe myrtles that are not natives. We plant those where we have overhead utilities. We try to find other small stature trees. My personal preference is I prefer using native species, but there are some very useful non-native species that are not invasive. For instance, locally, you can buy sawtooth oak, and I believe that's on a list of invasive exotic species of oak. So we don't plant those. So my personal preference is for native species or for proven exotics that are not invasive, because in some cases, maybe an exotic's the only thing that's going to survive in the altered landscape you have in a city.
Okay. And we've got one final question here from Andy Piper, asking for any advice on conducting training of local landscapers.
People who, you're talking about, I assume talking about people who install landscapes. They need to know what they're doing, and all too often you find trees in this part of the country. Many of the trees that you buy are grown in containers, and all too often landscapers will go in and just pull them out of the pot and drop them in the ground, not look at girdling roots, not seeing where the root collar is. What you can do is, if you're going to use a local landscaper, is write very specific specifications in terms of what you want them to do and how you want them to do it. Some of them are quite good, I'm sure, but some of them are not. They just, they want to get them in and get out of there. So you need to work with them. You can encourage them to, take courses in what they're doing. I know this local fellow here who's becoming a certified arborist is also taking a variety of extension courses on plant materials, plant material handling, and so on. So you can try to educate them. One of our biggest problems in our town is we have a lot of mowing services, and they do a lot of damage to trees, and we're constantly fighting that battle. They either run into the trees with the mowers, or they get out the old string trimmer and girdle them. And particularly a lot of our young crepe myrtles get girdled because they have such thin bark. But the best thing to do is I think, to write a contract that specifically directs them in terms of how you want the tree material handled and planted.
And you can also work with your cooperative extension offices. A lot of times they'll hold training sessions that you might be able to get your landscapers involved in to talk about proper tree care.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
But we are out of time for questions. Hopefully we got all the ones that were posted. What you should see now on your computers is a link for a webinar evaluation. If you could just take a couple minutes, there's only 5 or 6 questions on there. Select on that link and just provide some feedback on this webinar specifically, and maybe some ideas for some future webinar topics. That would be highly useful. I am going to be working on putting together a short quiz. It's only going to be 3 or 4 questions long, just to try and get a way for me to capture attendance for the folks that want to attend 3 or more of the webinars in the webinar series to qualify for the tree board certificate that we're going to be putting together with this series. The idea is that we've got 5 webinars being offered for people that attend 3 or more. Then they'll get a certificate of attendance for the tree board webinar series, and then also a resource manual that'll have publications that were useful for tree boards put together from. We'll be pulling resources from Arbor Day Foundation, ISA, some local things here in North Carolina that we've put together just to provide some input or some guidance for tree boards into the future. So I'll email everybody that has registered for this webinar. The quiz, I'm going to try and do that this afternoon. If you don't get something from me this afternoon, it'll be first thing in the morning. And it'll be a couple of short, just a few questions based off of the concepts that Dr. Miller presented during his presentation, just a way for me to track attendance. And you can see that we've got the list of the upcoming webinars that go into the beginning part of 2014.
Leslie?
Yes.
When you send out the questions, you're certainly welcome to put my email address on there. If any of them didn't get a chance to ask a question, they can certainly email me, and I'll be happy to respond as best I can.
Okay, that would be great, because I do see there are 1 or 2 other questions that have come up since this, but just for time saving, since we are at our limit for the 1-hour webinar slot, then I'll send an email out to all the attendees that will have the link to the webinar quiz, as well as Bob Miller's contact information if you want to ask further questions, and I'll also put the webinar evaluation on there that you can go to and just take a few minutes. But with that, thank you guys for attending. I hope you found it valuable. Feel free to contact me with any questions, concerns, or input that you'd like to provide. I'm always open to suggestions. Dudley, do you have anything you want to add before we close out?
No, nothing really. I noticed though that when we put these links up on the webinar, that they aren't clickable. So if you want to go to that evaluation link immediately, just copy everything from surveymonkey.com down and then type it back in your browser. But you're going to send that link out to them.
I'll send that link out as well.
Right.
Yep.
That'll be good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. With that, I hope everybody has a good day, and we look forward to talking with you at future webinars. Thank you.
And Leslie, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep the webinar up so that if people want to get the handouts and haven't downloaded them already, I'll keep it open for about 20 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Hey, Dudley, I'm stopping the recording for this.
That's good, and I'll send that link to you as soon as I get it.